I slammed the laptop shut. The tension coiled tightly in my chest. Skylar. Her face alone was enough to ignite the fury simmering beneath my skin, but seeing her put her hands on Ariana's brother, the audacity of it, was too much. My father had played his games long enough, pulling strings, keeping Skylar hidden like a weapon he knew would drive me mad. But now she was back and I wasn't going to let her slip away this time. I grabbed my phone, quickly dialing the number of one of my men stationed at the house. He picked up on the second ring. "Get Skylar," I ordered, my voice cold and sharp. "Bring her to the courthouse. Now." There was no hesitation. "Yes, boss." I hung up without another word and immediately dialed my lawyer. "I'm coming over," I said the moment he answered. My voice clipped. "Get the divorce papers ready." I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat as I got in my car. The engine roared to life, and I drove with a single-minded focus, my grip tight on the steering wheel. When I reached the courthouse, I parked on the side of the building and waited, my pulse steady, but the tension inside me grew with every passing second. I drummed my fingers on the dashboard, eyes locked on the road, waiting for the car that would bring Skylar here. Minutes felt like hours. Then finally, I saw the black SUV pull up, my men stepping out first, followed by Skylar. I stepped out of the car, my movements deliberate, my eyes locked on her. The moment she saw me, I caught the flicker of fear in her eyes, and she stumbled back a step, as if trying to create some distance between us. "Stay right there," I growled, my voice low, barely holding back the fury that coursed through me. She froze, her eyes wide, but the fear was quickly replaced by that arrogance she always carried. It made me sick. I closed the distance between us in 2 long strides, grabbing her cheeks in my hand, fingers digging into her skin hard enough to make her eyes water. "I'm going to divorce you," I hissed through clenched teeth. "And after that, I'm going to fucking make your life a living hell. I'm going to make you regret every second of breath you've taken. Every dollar I spent looking for you, every sleepless night, every fucking thing you put me through. You'll pay for all of it." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, but I didn't care. I released her with a sharp shove, making her stumble backward. She caught herself, but her composure was slipping. I glanced at my man, jerking my head toward the courthouse doors. "Bring her in." Without another word, I walked ahead, hearing the shuffle of footsteps behind me as my men escorted her. The heavy wooden doors of the courthouse swung open as I stepped inside, the sound of my footsteps echoing in the nearly empty hall. Skylar was behind me, dragged along by my men, her resistance minimal, though I could feel the tension in her steps. She knew this was the end of the road for her. Inside the room, my lawyer, Jason, stood by the table, flipping through the final documents, and the judge, an old man with tired eyes, sat waiting. He greeted me with a light smile, which I barely acknowledged with a curt nod. This was a formality, nothing more. "Can we get this over with?" I said, my voice steady, cutting through the quiet. "I have somewhere important to go." The judge cleared his throat and gestured to the papers on the table. "Of course, Mr. Anderson, everything's ready. All that's needed are the signatures." Jason stepped forward, holding out the papers to me. I took them without hesitation, barely skimming through them. I didn't need to read the details. I already knew what they contained. With a flick of my wrist, I signed the papers in clean, sharp strokes, each letter punctuated with finality. I turned, extending the documents to Skylar. "Sign," I ordered, my voice cold. Skylar's hand trembled as she reached for the pen. She avoided my gaze, her eyes fixed on the paper as though it would somehow make this easier. I could tell she wanted to say something, her lips parted, a faint breath escaping, but she swallowed the words. Good. The less she spoke, the better. With a shaky hand, she signed her name, the ink barely legible from her trembling fingers. When she finished, she let out a small, shaky breath, as if the act of signing had drained her. Without a word, I handed the papers back to Jason, who nodded in silent understanding. I turned to leave, my steps purposeful as I walked out of the courthouse. Outside, the sunlight was blinding, but it didn't warm me. There was no sense of relief, only the next task at hand. I turned to Jason as he followed me out. "Thanks for handling this," I muttered. "Of course, Mr. Anderson. If you need anything else, let me know," he replied, ever professional. I turned to my men who stood on either side of Skylar. "Get this thing out of my sight and take it back to the house. Tie her in the basement until I return." My voice was like ice, and my men didn't hesitate. They each grabbed one of Skylar's arms, pulling her toward the door. She tried to hold back, but they were stronger and she knew it. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible. She struggled for a second, but when it became clear there was no point, she went limp in their grasp. I got into my car and slammed the door shut, my hands gripping the wheel tightly as I drove away from the courthouse. My destination was clear: the warehouse, my private one, hidden beneath layers of secrecy, the place where I kept everything that mattered. It wasn't long before I pulled up to the hidden entrance. I parked the car and stepped out, breathing in the crisp air. The warehouse loomed in front of me, cold and unfeeling, just like everything inside it. I made my way to the underground entrance, inputting the code that granted me access. I walked past the rows of crates, each one holding something valuable, until I reached the one that Paul wants so badly. I opened the container, my hands steady, though my thoughts were far from calm. As the lid lifted, I scanned the contents. Everything was exactly as it should be, neatly packed, untouched, waiting. Each piece inside represented a move on the chessboard of power, a game I'd been forced into far too young. Weapons, along with the documents, men would kill for. I ran my hand over the cold metal, feeling the weight of it all, not just in my hand but in my chest. With a deep breath, I closed the lid, the click of the lock echoing in the quiet of the underground chamber. I stared at the container, knowing what this would set into motion. What I was about to do was irreversible. I pulled out my phone and dialed. Paul answered on the first ring, his voice smug, almost as if he'd been waiting for this moment. "I didn't expect your call this early," he started, clearly enjoying this too much. "But let's hear what you have to say." "I have the container," I said, keeping my voice as steady as I could. "Send me my wife's address, and I'll send the container to whatever address you want." He laughed, the sound grating on my nerves. "I knew this woman was your wife, but I never thought you'd go against everything your father stands for. And this quickly. All for her. Since when did you become so weak over a woman, Grayson?" I clenched my fist, the phone tight in my grip. "Just send me the damn address," I hissed through gritted teeth. "You, cool down, dude," he said, clearly amused. "I'll send it right now. Relax, will you?" The line went dead, and I stared at my phone for a moment before pocketing it. My gaze returned to the container, the weight of what I was about to do sinking in. This wasn't just about the trade anymore. This was about defying the man who had molded me into the person I am. A man who believed in control and power above all else. By handing over this container, I was declaring war on my father. I knew it. I felt it. But I didn't care anymore. It's the least I can do for Ariana, after everything I put her through. It didn't matter what came next. It didn't matter what I would have to face. This was for her. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was doing the right thing, even if it meant burning everything else down around me.